Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. I'm such a morning person, so it's a lot easier for me to say good morning. My name is Kayla Barrows, and I'm the Vice President of Human Resources here at JVS. So welcome to our home. For those of you that are here for the first time, welcome. We host our economic opportunity forums twice a year, and we've been doing this since 2015. And today's theme is how to create a better workplace to benefit employees and employers. And we're really grateful to have the Davis Family Charitable Foundation sponsoring the event today. And I'm sorry, I hear a little bit of feedback. Maybe I okay. Um, and we are co-hosting with the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. And I will introduce our panelists soon, but I want to introduce Justin Kane, who's the Vice President of Economic Growth and also the Executive Director of City Awake, who is with us here. He's going to do a brief intro, and then I'll come back up and introduce our special guests. Justin?
Good morning, everyone. There you go, much better, thank you. I just want to say thank you all so much for coming here today. It's such a refreshing thing for us to consider. We were at an event yesterday, me and Tia, thinking at another workplace forum, and it's just amazing to see just over the last 10 years how seriously businesses and corporations are thinking about retention as an issue in addition to attraction. So this topic to us at the Chamber is very important, and we're happy and thrilled to be sponsoring it as well. One thing that we think about, especially from last year, is just the retention part. And I'll just leave you with sort of just one statistic. We're taking it from a very sort of specific lens around race. Over the last couple of years, we've been trying to elevate the issues around millennials of color. And one thing that we came across was that young professionals are 3 times more likely to leave their corporate jobs than their white counterparts. And that has no issue around talent or capacity or competency. It has everything to do with culture and the workplace that you build. So with those statistics and those lived experiences that are being shared with us, we're happy to be here today to add to the conversation and continuing partnering with JVS. So thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you, Justin. So again, like Justin said, just given the tight labor market, employers are really trying to figure out ways to create a better workplace for employees in order to be able to attract and retain them. So we figured, why not bring 2 really cool people to the table to have this discussion. And so they're running a little late, but in the meantime, we're going to introduce you guys to 2 individuals. Aaron Ein, who's the CEO of Kronos. And he is also the author of Work Inspired, How to Build an Organization Where Everyone Loves to Work. Aaron, we'll give them each about 10 minutes to sort of introduce their work and their book. But the perspective that he's coming from is sort of the individual company that focuses on the strategy on how to develop and retain talent. And then David Weil, who is the Dean at the Heller School for Social Policy and Management at Brandeis University. And he is the author of his book, and it's called, the Fissured Workplace. I did not write it in my notes, I apologize. And his book is very different than Aaron in the sense of it's focused on the structural barriers as well as the structural solution. So it's kind of interesting to bring the 2 of them to the table. So we'll start the forum by having each of them talk for about 10 minutes. And then I'll start off because I want to go first, and I'll ask each of them a question, and then we'll open it up to the audience to ask questions that you might have for each of them. So since you're next to me, I'll let you go first, Aaron, and then I'll join you guys.
Can you hear me without?
So I just want we're trying to be very.
Say that's too bad for the people who are live streaming, but I'll use the mic.
So in an effort to be creative and innovative, we are live streaming this forum for folks that can't physically be here with us today.
Okay, hi over there. Yeah, hi. Justin, just for the record, I think you're special also. So it's just not David and I through these things. And so I think I speak on behalf of David as well. We're really honored to be here today. And have this opportunity to speak about a subject or subjects that are really important to us. And certainly we're grateful to JVS, an organization I've known for a long time, grateful to its leadership. What happens at the top from a board leadership, from a professional leadership, really does remarkable work in our community. And I know it's not easy to do all the things you do. So thank you for all the supporters and the staff and team members who make that possible. So my name is Aaron Ain. I work for a company called Kronos, Kronos. I'm in my 40th year at Kronos. I'm one of these whack jobs that's only worked at one place his whole career. I know that they can get a life, get around, enjoy things a little bit, but it's worked out for me. And I'm not a founder of the company, although I'm one of the first 10 employees. I'm not complaining, by the way, about that. I've been treated fine, but from that point of view, and I've been the CEO of the company since 2005. And we're a company that is a software company, an enterprise application software company. What we did in the late 1970s was invented the first computerized time clock. The time clock actually hadn't changed, that device you punch in and out on, since the 1950s at that time. And we put a microprocessor in a device that looked like a time clock, and we automated all the collection and calculation of people's pay so that it would be more accurate, be done quicker, and organizations could focus on other things. And since then, we've just grown from that, from no employees when we started to today. We just crossed 6,000 employees at the company, a global organization. And today we do all sorts of software that help organizations effectively manage their workforce, not just keeping track of when people come and go to pay them accurately, and all the work rules, all the wage and hour rules, all the company practices, industry practices, et cetera. But also we help companies schedule the right people, so the right person is in the right place at the right time. So think about just about any place you can think of, from healthcare to retail to manufacturing, public sector, police officers and firemen. We schedule thousands of organizations, millions of employees, so people don't have to do it manually and get a better result in terms of having the right person in the right place. The best one I tell people is, how many people are Apple users? Yeah, Apple one. So if your Apple device breaks, what do? You cry, and then when you get done feeling sorry for yourself and say, I have this, you probably go online and you look up and you say, I have an iPad, an iPhone, or an iMac, or whatever device, and you say, I want to go to a particular store. It says, come in tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. at this particular place. That's our software behind the scenes that does all the skills, skills, cost, availability, preference, seniority. So it makes sure people work when they want to work, and it makes sure people are available for the customers. So think about big healthcare institutions. We do that. And so today, our products are used in over 100 countries. I just got the latest count, 115 in one form or another. Over 40 million people start the process of getting paid by interacting with a Kronos system. We've added between 1,000 and 1,500 people to Kronos a year for the past 5 years on a global basis. That includes replacing turnover and whatnot. So I feel blessed that I work at just such a remarkable company. Having said all that, the thing that makes me most proud is being a great place to work. This past November, we were rated as the #1 place to work in Massachusetts by the Boston Globe. We were #1 in 2014, one of the happiest days of my career. And then we fell to #2 or 3 in 15, 16, 17. And then in 18, we came back to #1. And like I told the staff when they got all depressed about being #2, I said, the other people want to be #1 too. They're trying to get better every year. They're allowed to do that. And so we strive to do that. Just last week, we were ranked as the 2nd best place to work in Mexico, where we have a big team, as rated by our employees. And we were just rated the 10th best place to work in the UK, highest rating we've ever had there. We've had similar ratings in India, China, Australia, Canada, other places where we have a meaningful presence around the world. Most of our employees in the US are in Lowell, Massachusetts, where we've been. For those of you who know the old Wang Tower, we took over that building. We have half of those 3 towers, about 1,500 to 1,600 people there. and then people in other parts of the US, Canada, and around the world. So I'm really proud to work for Kronos. And so the purpose of today, what David and I are going to talk about is this whole idea about how to create an engaged workforce. And the way I tell it to people is that I believe great organizations are powered by great people. Great people produce great products, great people deliver great service. And if you want to go out and be a company like we do that recruits great people, then you can't just put all your time into the recruiting great people. You have to put as much, if not more time, into focused on retaining great people. And that's really hard to do, but we do it every day. Now, I tell people who get frustrated with that, I tell them, look, I say the problem with recruiting great people is that great people have choices, and because they're great. And if you don't create a great environment, then they'll go do something else because they can. And if you don't like those dynamics, then go hire mediocre people. They have less choices. And so they give me, like I call the Lassie look, you know, like they have no idea what I'm talking about with their head. And so I tell them that's it. So I believe people join companies because of the company. I believe they leave because of who they work for. We have 800 people managers. We hold every one of them accountable. Every one of them has a manager effectiveness index as rated by the people who work for them twice a year. People with high MEIs have the lowest turnover and the highest engagement. Managers with the lower MEIs have the highest turnover and the lowest engagement. We work with them. Either you get your MEIs up, or you have to go do something else at the company. I tell the people who work at the company all the time, it's a privilege to be a manager. It's an honor to be a manager, but it's also incredibly difficult. It takes wild courage to be a great leader. Our training program is called Courage to Lead. I tell the team that the action word is courage, it's not lead. Who likes to have difficult conversations with people when things aren't going well? Like no one. And so you really have to have the courage to go do it and think about how to do that, but you have to do it. You have to have the courage to be a great leader, because people join companies because of the company, they leave because of who they work for. I believe that with all my heart. And so we try to make sure that we recruit great people, then we create an environment where people want to stay. Our results speak for themselves. I'll say two more things and then turn it over to David, is that I tell the employees who work at the company that if the most important thing in their life is working for Kronos, they have their priorities mixed up. The most important thing in their life should be their families. And so we actively promote work-life balance. We have open vacation policy. People can take as much time off as they want. Well, I'm not going to say as they want, as they need. Everybody can't go at the same time. You have to get permission to do it, but we don't keep track of it in the traditional way. So since we started this in January 2016, our turnover has gone down to record levels. Our engagement has gone up. And in 2016, we had the best year we ever had. So people tell me, how do you know it worked? I say, I don't know. Our turnover went down, our engagement went up, and we had the best year we ever had. I don't know what other evidence to give you of that, but it reflects our desire to tell people that the most important thing in their lives should be their family. They should have balance. I tell them I want Kronos to be important to them. But the most important thing, I tell them that's silly. You know, like I don't tell them to get a life, but if they don't get it, I tell them to get a life. And then I tell them to go home and give their loved ones, whoever those are, could be your pets, I tell them, a big hug at the end of the day and tell them thank you for being supportive. And I tell them if they do that right, whoever that is will look at them and say, what got into you today? Like, what was that all about? And they say, well, Aaron told me to do that. And they say, who's Aaron? And it leads to a whole conversation about work-life balance. And it's like checkmate. And so we have the whole thing moving forward. And so our magic is our people. We have great products, we have great service, we have great customers, but it's all brought to all of those groups by the great people who work at the company. So I'll talk more when we have time about why I wrote this book, and it wasn't on my bucket list, by the way. It was a terribly difficult process. I'm not doing it again. People say you should write another one. I say I have no idea what I would write about from that point of view, but it really reflects my value system about trust, communication, transparency, respect, all these things that I think make successful companies go around. And so, yeah, so that's who I am. That's what I do. And I'm happy to be here. Turn over to David. You have yours. Okay.
Thank you. So I'm an academic in part because I like to learn new things every day. And I've learned so my first learning today is never follow Aaron Ain in a speaking series. I will remember that. So I want to start just also by thanking JVS and Jerry and Kayla for inviting me and Aaron to this event and the opportunity to speak with you all. And I'm delighted to be on a panel with Aaron, whose company and his work I admire greatly, and have a particular view of it for reasons I'll describe in a moment. I am currently my name's David Weil, and I am the Dean of the Heller School for Social Policy and Management at Brandeis University. I've been the Dean there for 2 years. This is the end of my second year. Most of my career, I've been an academic. I was at Boston University for about 23 years in the School of Management there. But what I've studied all my life is the labor market and workplace policies, and particularly public policies to protect workers with respect to health and safety, wage and hour laws, discrimination, and a whole wide variety of issues like that. And I was always very interested in my work to not just study the laws and say what laws should be, but I've always been interested in how laws are actually implemented, how employers comply with laws, how other institutions like unions, advocacy organizations affect the enforcement of laws, and how government agencies work. And I guess I talked and yacked about that long enough that during the Obama administration, I was approached by the White House and asked, did I want to stop talking and actually do a little something? And I was honored to be nominated by President Obama to be the head of the Wage and Hour Division, which is the government agency in the Labor Department that enforces our basic labor standards and the kind of labor standards that Kronos provides support in helping businesses understand their compliance requirements. And I was particularly honored to do that because it came on the heels of work I had actually done for the Labor Department for over a decade, looking at the question of who complies with laws and who doesn't, and how does a government agency, the Wage and Hour Division, when I took it over, had about responsibility for 7.4 million workplaces in the United States, and we had about 1,000 investigators. And so I'm trained as an economist, so the basic economics question is, how do you allocate scarce resources to achieve objectives? And so, and that's what my work focused a lot on. And so we really faced the challenge of how do we think differently about using our resources to make sure we were changing the levels of compliance and the protections for working people with our basic labor laws. In the process of doing that work, I came across what really struck me as a fundamental change in a lot of industries in the way businesses had organized themselves. And increasingly what I found, and this is particularly related to who complies with laws and who didn't, more and more businesses were shifting out activities, different kinds of activities, to other parties to actually do. And that could be in the form of staffing agencies. Sometimes it was through third-party management systems. Sometimes it was through the increasing use of franchising in parts of the economy. We were less used to seeing it, like in janitorial services, or maybe in areas like home care. And quite often what I found was that in these businesses that had shifted out this work, and in one sense, we're still exercising a great deal of control over those subsidiary businesses doing the work, and I'll give a specific example in a moment. In one sense, the business was really managing everything. In the other sense, they were saying, but they're not our workers anymore. They're someone else's problems. And the reason I came up, I'm married to my wife now works at Children's Hospital, but in an earlier stage of her career, she was a geologist. So one morning, the occupational hazard of being married to a professor is you have to hear your spouse go on and on about what he or she is working on. So I was extolling, talking about this to my wife one morning, And she looked at me and she said, well, it sounds like you're describing fissures, fissures in a rock, that you once had this solid thing called employment. And what's happened, like a fissure in a rock, it's broken apart. The employment relationship breaks apart. And like a fissure, and so the book is called The Fissured Workplace, because to me, that was exactly right, that fissures do two things. One is once a rock starts to fissure, it deepens. And what I found in industry after industry is once you start subcontracting work, let's say, the subcontracting begets more subcontracting. And you get this deepening of these multiple parties involved in the employment relationship. And the other thing fissures do is spread. And so, this kind of thing has always been in some industries like construction, even older, the garment industry has had this. But what I found is it was spreading. So we found it in hotels. You have hotels, increasingly hotels, the branded hotels we walk into, we associate with the brand, but in only 5% of branded hotels in this company is that property owned and managed by the brand you associate with it. Instead, what's happened is hotel properties have been sold to other, sometimes real estate investment trusts, sometimes it's private equity, other people who hold the property. The property is managed as a Hilton or a Marriott or Hyatt. The brand, the value is in the brand. But then you'll have the owners of that property hire a third-party management company, who in turn very often hire staffing agencies to provide the different functions in the hotel, but all operating under the exacting standards of the lead company. And the result of that, in my own research, and I found this profoundly as the head of the wage and hour division, is you often find major compliance problems within that, because the more you break things up, the murkier responsibility becomes. Unfortunately, in the kinds of ways, and inevitably what you need to do as a head of a regulatory agency is you should be focusing your attention on where the problems are, which meant I was usually dealing with employers who were not like Kronos. I unfortunately had to spend a lot of my time with employers, some of whom were doing fissuring to avoid compliance with laws, who were simply playing games of what I would call regulatory arbitrage. And we use tools of enforcement to deal with that. In other cases, I think it's very true, the economy has changed. We reorganize, and there are certain specializations that this shifting reflects that make sense. And if you assign responsibility responsibly, that can still lead to compliance and people knowing what they should be doing, or making sure that the subcontractor or the third-party management company they're hiring is complying with the law. And so we had certainly some employers that we were able to work on a voluntary basis to improve compliance. But the reason I wrote the book, and the reason that I continue to do this in my spare time when I'm not being a dean, doing research on this, is the wiring under the hood of our economy has changed fundamentally. And it's not just compliance with laws. We all know that earnings inequality is a growing problem in this country. And there's more and more evidence that I read that says part of this is the way we set wages is being affected by this fissuring in all its different forms. And it means that particularly for workers, and I like Aaron's point very much about options, some of the workers we have to care most about, and I know some of the workers that JVS focuses on, are those with few options. It's workers with few skills, less education, who are more geographically locked into where they live for one reason or another. Those are the folks who are most vulnerable to all kinds of problems, but also tend to have their wages forced down. One of the most important things that I'm hoping both the book I wrote and the research that I continue to do with colleagues at the Heller School is to really figure out how has the wiring changed and how do we rebuild an economy that both does the amazing things businesses develop, creating value, but at the same time, we make sure that that value is shared with the employees in the way that Kronos has been wired to do. And I fear there are still far too many businesses in the wider economy who don't follow that model. And we need to think about in terms of our both private policies, the kind of policies that businesses think about, and our public policies. And so let me stop there and open it up to discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, both of you, for the lovely introduction. David, I'm going to start with you because you just wrapped up, and it's very interesting to hear the naming of your book. That was very interesting. So what do you think it takes for a company that does directly employ its worker to stay competitively in this environment, in this economy?
Well, I think Aaron described a lot of the elements. It's if you're taking the long view, if you're understanding that one of the most important, if the most important part of any business, of any organization. I mean, I feel this. I'm running a school, an academic institution. Our people are the investment in people in the organization, in the mission of the organization, who can bring their talents every day to the workplace and use those talents in pursuit of whatever the mission of, whether it's the private organization, a public, a nonprofit organization, is doing, and that everything in that organization is aligned with that. I mean, it was a great lesson for me. The wage and hour division had 2,000 people. And one of the things I thought a lot about in running that agency was, how do we align our own organization to make people understand how we do our mission? And in fact, a lot of the way we did our mission historically as an agency, we sought to change because the kind of complexity we're dealing in with the world required our own investigators and the people who staffed our offices to think differently. So I think this idea of aligning both the creative talents of the people who work in an organization with the mission is the critical thing of both developing and keeping people. And I would just link this back to, I think, one of the challenges of the fissured workplace. I think there are a lot of companies that are thinking in a very short-term basis and think about the immediate cost savings from doing things like shifting out and trying to avoid responsibility, and not thinking enough about the consequences of that, not only for the workforce, which again, company like Kronos put that right up at the front. I fear there are some companies that is secondary or even tertiary kind of consideration. But if you don't think in a longer term basis, I think it allows one to both pursue policies that are not beneficial to the workforce, but in the long run, I would argue, undermine the core objectives of the business itself.
I just wanted to add, you talked a lot about sort of the people, the employees that are affected by the companies that are sort of breaking down. I think a little bit about the employers on the opposite side that can't afford to be a Kronos, right? And sort of like, how do they stay competitive in this economy? How are they able to do the things that Kronos are doing by aligning themselves with the mission, by caring for their people without the unlimited resources that they have? So it's just you look at it both ways. So the next question is for Aaron. Given the trends in corporate America that David described, how do you think, how has Kronos managed to avoid the outsourcing of your employees and staying competitive and actually growing globally?
Okay, well, let me just one thing clarification. I wish we had unlimited resources. So I appreciate that view. We actually don't overpay people. We don't underpay people, but we strive to be a little bit above average from that point of view. But we really focus on all the other things that make a difference in people's decisions to join and stay with a company. Some of the things I talked about before. So look, we're in a war for talent right now, and we can tell unemployment in most of the places we do business. We hire, generally speaking, knowledge workers, as we call them, engineers, finance, HR, IT, cloud support, marketing, sales, all those type of positions. And we can tell unemployment zero. Why? Because just about everybody who we hire now has another job. We're taking people away from other positions, where not that long ago, half the people we hired didn't have jobs, and we could pursue that differently. So, so look, people are the magic of who we are, and it's not that we don't outsource some of our activities. We do, and I'll explain why in a minute. It's that we believe that our biggest investment, the most important investment that we can make, is the people who work in our organization. And we believe, like I said, it will allow us to produce better products, deliver better service. At the same time, it's a fragile existence. So we have moments when we need to surge with activity. When we surge with activity, we need another 100 or 200 people to go hire those people to be full-time people who work for the company, knowing that in a year from now, we won't need those people. That's a difficult conversation to think about what to do. I tell people that when you go and make a decision to reduce staff, and we do it because we have to do it to stay vital, it's not lifetime employment with the company, even beyond performance metrics. It's just not the people who are impacted by not being at the company anymore. It's all the people who are left behind who still work there, who see their friends have left. And so we have to consider all these things. And so we try to balance really carefully what we need to do with people in positions that are going to stay with us permanently, and what we need to do in terms of doing things from a surge point of view. And so that's when we will get organizations both in this country and out of this country to do contract work for us or outsourced work for us, do great work for us. But we do it understanding that I don't want to go bring people in and then let them go a year from now when the work isn't there. Look, I have a responsibility to the people who are our shareholders, our employees, our customers, the families who depend on us to run the company effectively, thoughtfully, fiscally proper, not just go spend wildly and then leave yourself exposed in future periods where you won't be able to continue to move the business forward. Another example, it takes courage to go do those things. We don't do that alone. So I think it starts with the desire to have people who work for us, who can be part of our team and produce great results, but also understanding it's not a bad thing when you have to outsource some of those activities as I described. Right now, we probably have around the world an additional 600 people who do Kronos work full-time for us, who are not Kronos employees. And they're not franchise people, they're not resellers, they're not distributors. They're directed by us and our activities to help us meet these needs that exist today. So we balance that. We think about it carefully. And then I'll just finally say that this whole gig economy, it's estimated in the US over 30 million people are gig workers today. People think of gig workers as Uber drivers. It's much deeper than that. And so we also have to understand there's people who don't want to work in a traditional workforce, who are wildly talented. And so how do we attract and retain those people and create an environment that meets their particular needs? So we focus on that as well.
So before opening up to everyone, I just have one follow-up. So for the 600 folks that you outsource, are they embedded in your culture? Or are they completely separate? And how does that impact your culture, having folks that are outsourced?
Well, they're not embedded in our culture, but we work with them all the time, so they can't help but, experience the culture. For better or for worse, a lot of times I come and say, can I come work for Kronos instead of where I work? And we have to say no, because part of our deal is we won't do that from that perspective. But they get it, and our people get it. Our people are grateful because we explain to them clearly why we do this. They know that we have to surge to do a particular thing. And we tell them we don't want to have to go up and then go down. And I think that's fine. I think that that's a reasonable way to run a business. So I'd love to have everybody work for us full time all the time and never have to go up or down, but it's not the way the world works. And so we live in this, world of trying to deal with complexity and uncertainty. And I find it actually tremendously fun to do. No, I do. It's like, I love chaos and I love bringing order to chaos. And some people accuse me of creating chaos to bring order to it, but I don't do that. but you know, I like things that are intellectually difficult to figure out how to do, and this is an example of that.
Just pick up on a few things, and I'm going to invite Aaron to my academic institution, because if you love chaos, come to an academic institution. I love my institution, by the way, just footnote. No, I just just picking up on two things that Aaron talked about that are really important. Businesses have always staffed surge needs and uncertainty. I mean, that's what what used to be called the temp agencies or the temp world, which is now called staffing. Importantly, I think that changed. Responded to the uncertainties of business that make perfect sense why you don't staff up to capacity every time you have a spike in demand. That makes perfect sense. I think what we're seeing more and more is companies having permatemps. I mean, there's the phrase that is used, that the people are being used permanently in those positions. And again, sometimes that still might be for business purposes of specialization. My concern is where it is a way that is subverting some of the things that normally we'd expect employers to do, and I think that's an important difference. The other thing I'd just say about the gig workers, I think it is very true. There is a proportion, particularly of people with skills, education, who are working in certainly in the tech industry and digital industries, that like the gig kinds of relationships. Again, there's a second group of workers that I'm deeply concerned about who have these relationships, and they tend to be lower wage workers, again, with fewer options, who are doing this work because that's what they need to do and that's what's available to them. And this, again, is where I think we have to think hard from a public policy point of view. For that group of workers, my analogy is my coconut pie, what I call my coconut pie story. If you're hungry and someone offers you coconut pie, or coconut pie, you're going to eat coconut pie, not because you particularly like coconut pie, but because those are the options available to you. And I think there is a set of this more contingent part of the workforce that don't have options and unfortunately have to choose these kinds of more contingent relationships because that's all that's available to them.
Thank you. So we're going to open it up, and Kelly's going to walk around and provide the mics only because we're live streaming and want to make sure we capture the questions.
I had a question for David. In terms of working with those lower level workers who are either underemployed or underskilled, there's a lot of structural barriers that are part of that as well. But without getting into public education, blah, 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 can you talk a little bit about what studies there are, what experiences there are with employers working to build capacity in those workers, either pre-hire or post-hire, to bring those folks up to the levels of, computer literacy or basic workforce readiness?
That's a great question. And I think the experience, certainly the studies of different kinds of interventions in that way, it's mixed. That there are a lot, there was a very evocative story in the New York Times this weekend about these efforts to provide training and coding skills to folks in West Virginia that unfortunately were aligned with some people who were in that business, not for the best of purposes. We have a lot of experience with job training programs in this country that don't ultimately lead to people being connected to the workforce. One of the reasons I admire the work of JVS is that it's a more holistic approach to thinking of both the skills needed and then placement needed. I think that is always, to me, the sign of successful programs is where people think about how does this labor market operate? Not just what are the skill needs, but then what are the additional barriers that people have about learning about the importance of showing up to work at the right time, of solving transportation problems. The problem, I think, of so many particularly low-wage workers, is there is a whole web of barriers that exist. It's not just one thing. I think those initiatives that involve employers, local governments, advocacy organizations that think about the structure of work in a labor market and figure out ways to overcome some of those barriers. Those to me are the promising examples. But at least my own sense, and there are people in this room with a heck of a lot more knowledge in this area, my own sense is those still are not the majority of programs we have nationally to address this problem. But the Fissured Workplace to me says we really have to dig into that even deeper.
So if we could step back just for a minute to the outsourcing piece of things, and I have, I guess, a question for both. What is the corporation's responsibility of vetting the companies that are doing the outsourcing for you?
I think they're very significant. I mean, I think that's one of the things we tried to change in our strategies at the Wage and Hour Division, which is to say, there are many instances, again, going back to Aaron's comment, there's a lot of reasons why businesses legitimately want to outsource work, whether it's to deal with spiking demand, deal with specific skills they need for a short period of time, and so on. What we wanted to make sure businesses did, and then vet those businesses, vet those partners in terms of, particularly if you're going to exercise enormous oversight of what they do and the outcomes, then you should understand you own some of those outcomes, you know, and unfortunately the way some of our laws work, it creates exactly the wrong incentives. If you don't want to be held liable, you try to look the other way about what goes on in the work site. I had wonderful relationships, as did my counterpart who ran the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, a guy named David Michaels, with the American Staffing Association, because they understood their interest in actually having the people who use them responsibly required those companies that hired members of the American Staffing Association to really provide, let's say, health and safety information to their workers so that when they went on a temporary basis onto a site, they didn't get injured. You know, I think it's that kind of thing to say, it's fine if you want to use this kind of different kinds of outsourcing, but then understand and take responsibility for making sure you are partnering with responsible people. That's what we tried to do both through the law and through persuasion.
Thank you. Both to Aaron and David. I want to know if there's a reason to be somewhat more optimistic about firms following Kronos's approach. As we all know, the unemployment rate is real low. What's possibly even more important, David and I've done work on this, is if you look at the number of openings, not just net job creation, but the number of openings over the next decade, it's about 24 openings for every one new job. So it seems to me that almost regardless of what's happening in the economy, firms are going to be facing labor shortages. To that extent, do you find more firms now looking to what you're doing in order to improve their opportunities to attract and retain labor? Right here, if you read yesterday's Globe, with the opening of the Encore Casino, all the firms around it are worried about losing their workers and do not know how to replace them. Does that give us an opportunity to change the workplace in fundamental ways to make them more family friendly, to make them better employers?
Well, I think yes. I think the whole gig worker that I talked about world, I think people have, when they have choices, you have to differentiate yourself in terms of balance and methods of work. I also think it's forcing companies like Kronos to think about how we do things where we don't need people to do them, just being direct about it. Because we have no choice. We have to automate things and use technology to advance practices so we can really focus people on areas where people need to be part of what we do. And I can give you lots of examples with that. So I'm worried about this. And look, it makes me feel fantastic that we're rated a great place to work. Why would I not feel good about that? but it's not why we do it. We do it because it helps us differentiate ourselves competitively to hire people. It helps us have an advantage in terms of recruiting the best and brightest. Other companies who don't do that are going to be penalized. It's just the ecosystem, the life cycle of what happens in the world of both for-profit and not-for-profit organizations. You either figure out how to do it or you're going to be left behind. So I think there's going to be no choice but to go adjust and do these things. One of the reasons I wrote the book was to try to share our practices of what we do to differentiate ourselves. I mean, I'll tell you just one little thing quickly. It's when I walk into the building, first of all, when I walk around, cell phones in my pocket, head up, talk to everybody. Okay, over communicate, just basic respect for people to create an environment. But when I see people sitting in the lobby, I can tell the people there for interviews, they're overdressed and they look really nervous. So I know my people have helped them. So I go up and I say to them, oh, you being helped. I call this what I'm going to describe premeditated spontaneity, if you can follow where I'm going. And they go and say to me, yeah, I'm being helped. I go, oh, what are you here for? And they say, oh, I'm here for an interview. I go, oh, no kidding. What kind of job? And they go, IT, HR, finance, engineer, whatever it is. And I go, oh, where do you work now? And they say so-and-so. And I go, why interested in Kronos? And they go, because it's a great place to work. And I go, how do you know that? You never worked here. Unbelievably practiced on my part. And they say, because I read about it on Glassdoor, where we've been rated one of the 100 best companies to work for. 770,000 companies are rated on Glassdoor. 3 years in a row, top 100. They say, oh, I read about it in the Boston Globe. So before they even have their first interview with us, they have a point of view about that they want to come work for us. Unbelievable. I'm not saying it's checkbait, but it makes a difference in our ability to recruit great people and retain great people. We have something unique. I wrote a whole chapter in the book about it called boomerangs. We have 250 people who have left Kronos who have come back to work for us. We don't own people's careers. If people want to go do something else, we say, please don't leave, but if you leave, good luck. And I tell them, I want you to make believe I'm a little birdie sitting on your shoulder, saying to them, you can come back. And so we actually recruit boomerangs. Can you believe that? Go to our career webpage. We have a part there. If you used to work for Kronos and you want to come back and you see a job, apply. Because we don't own their careers. If they decided to go do something else, and when they worked for us, they were fantastic. We have an opening and they were fantastic. You bet we're going to bring them back. But other companies think, again, whack job. You make it too easy for people to leave. You're a safety net. They could come back. There's another example. We don't take that approach. And I think it helps us. And then when someone leaves, want to leave, I go walk around with them and I purposely walk by someone's area where I know they're a boomerang and I say, oh, have you met David before? Yeah, he left, but he came back. Why don't you spend a minute with him? And then I go back to work. And so, yeah, so these are things that I think we do and other people will have to do.
Just a quick addition to that. I'm also going to learn from that one too. I'm filling my mind this morning. You know, one of the interesting things about this recovery is how, and Barry, you know these statistics well, how long it took for tightening labor markets to actually show up in increasing in real wages. It's if you compare this recovery to the previous recoveries, it is an anomaly in just how many years it took for us to get to this point. And I think it's right that because of that, because of both the demographics and because of the recovery, should it hopefully continue, that pressure on companies to retain and to attract people in this environment is going to increase. I hate to be the glass half empty, though, is I worry there are still too many companies who are, because of probably capital market pressures on them by their investors and their own leadership, that don't take the long view that you know Aaron has described. And but I also agree with Aaron. that's going to have competitive impacts. Ultimately, that means you're going to have workforces that are going to be turning over much more constantly, and your ability to have a productive, engaged workforce is going to be compromised. And so if this is sustained, how that plays out could lead to a shifting of what the typical employer's practice looks like in that environment.
I think we have time for one more question. Coming to you, Mark.
So, Aaron, I mean, I must admit, I've been in the elevator at Kronos, and it's the longest elevator ride ever when you're with Aaron, because there are 20 people he talks to, and he doesn't even go to the floor he wants to go to. You know, it's part of just meeting people. But it's really, really hard work, I think, to embed values into the behavior of managers. I know you speak to it a bit in the book, but I wonder if you might talk about how you're basically codifying and structuring core values into manager behavior.
Right. So go back to what I said before. People join companies because of the company. They leave because of who they work for. Join because of the company, leave because of who they work for. So we recognize this. So starting about 6 or 7 years ago, we created a comprehensive program called Courage to Lead. Why, I don't know. You can figure out where the name came from. And it's our manager training program. And we put every people manager through a multi-day training with other managers over their first year with the company, no matter where they came from, share our values, our practices, all these things. And so when we first did it, we said, oh, check the box. We did it. We trained everyone. We're good. You know, let's go back to work. We have great managers. We didn't understand, silly us, that some people took to it and some people didn't. And so despite codifying what our rules are, in terms of how we manage and how we interact with each other. I'll give you a little example of that, come back to this. Performance reviews at Kronos, traditional performance reviews at companies, 100% you're graded by your manager on how what you did. You're a salesperson, did you make your quota? You're a service person, did you have utilization? You're an engineer, did you finish your projects? You get the idea. We switched to 60% is based on what you did, 40% is driven by how you did it, with a defined list of criteria of what's acceptable in the how area. You could be 200% of plan and get a 0 on how and get a below average review, okay? Because we're trying to drive our culture, what's acceptable practices, acceptable behaviors. So now we do that with the managers. So we realized that some people got it, so then we had to figure out what to do, and we started this manager effectiveness. So twice a year, every employee is asked 19 questions about the person they work for, and it's very directed. Does Mark Jacobs do this? There's no question who your manager is. We use tools to make sure it's very clear, and every manager then gets a rating, and we hold them accountable to improvement. I tell new managers, I don't care what it is the first time you get it. I care what it is 6 months from now. Show me progress. Maybe you didn't know. Had a 20-year manager when we first did it, came and said to me, Aaron, are we going to get training on how to be a better manager? I said, yeah, of course. Like, why? And they said, well, I thought I was a really good manager. And I said, oh, why did you think you were really good? This wasn't premeditated, by the way. I said, why did you think you were a good manager? And they said, because the engagement of the people on my team, the traditional engagement surveys, which measure the relationship between the employee and the company. Do you like your benefits? Are you paid well? Do you know the strategy? Do you have tools to do your job? These are traditional engagement survey questions. This person's team got an 89. So they said, if my people are engaged at that level, that's world class. They must be really happy. I must be a really good manager. Why would that manager conclude anything different than that? I would. So I said, okay, well, why don't you think you're a good manager now? I'm confused. They said, because I got my first MEI back and it's a 58. I'm like horrified by that. Now I'm exaggerating a little bit. I'm not sure they use the word horrified, but I'm upset about that. Are you going to help me be a better manager so that, of course, so we put things into place, but before our MEI, we had no idea. No idea. We had the same problem. That manager speaks with me sometimes about this now. Last quarter, this manager's MEI was 91. And so these are ways we do it. We're all in, elbows out. I live in a world of exposing reality. Like people like get frustrated with me when I talk about, don't tell me what you want it to be. Don't tell me what you think it is. Can we talk about what it is? If it's not good, then let's talk about what's not good. If it's great, let's talk about what's great, but let's expose and have a conversation about the reality of what's going on, and then work our way towards a better world. And that's what we do by codifying all this. It's hard work. It's backbreaking work. One last thing, and I promise. So we had employees, individual contributors, and the past year came and said to us, how come I'm an individual contributor and I don't get an employee effectiveness rating? What do you mean? Well, my manager gets an MEI. Why can't I get one? What do you think? What are you thinking? I want one. I want to know. The only person who tells me how I'm doing is my manager. That's incomplete. So now we're working on a KEI. We call each other Cronites, just what we call each other. And it's going to be a Cronite effectiveness index. Every employee we're working on to come up with a program will get surveys will be done. We're trying to figure out, who do you survey? Who are your peers? Who will give you? And imagine all 6,000 employees will get a KEI and know what they think, not just their manager rating them. We can't find any other company that's doing this like this. We've tried to find, but we're going to go trailblaze again to try to change our practices to make us a better company. And so just other ideas. See why it's so much fun having my job? Unbelievable. It's like joyful. So yeah, okay, I'm done.
And he says he doesn't know whether or not he'll write a second book. I could already, like, the wheels are already spinning. Well, thank you very much. We've actually, we've run out of time, but thank you, Aaron and David, for joining us today. This was very, it was a pleasure sitting up here with both of you. The conversation was really rich, especially for me as an HR person. But I hope that all of you in here had an opportunity to learn from both Aaron and David. We have their books out here by the registration table for purchase, so it is available. But thank you again for joining us this morning, and have a great day.
Thank you.